My husband and I got married in 1991, and we lived with my parents for a while so that we could save money. We thought we would buy a trailer and put it on my grandparents' land, or maybe scrape enough money together for a down payment on a home. Well, we got the biggest surprise when my grandfather came and told us that he didn't give us a wedding gift, but he had something for us now, and he handed us a manila envelope. Well, inside that envelope were keys and the deed to a cabin that I didn't even know he had. The cabin was a 2-hour drive from my parents' house and set back more than 50 miles off the main road. My husband was a truck driver, and he was about to leave to go back out on the road, so we had to wait to check out the cabin. I was dying to see it, because until my grandfather handed us that envelope, I had no idea that he owned a cabin. I was really surprised, and I asked my grandpa why he never said anything about owning this property. My grandpa told me that he was left the property by an old friend of his who passed away just 3 years prior to my husband and I getting married. Grandpa said that it was a roomy 3-bedroom cabin with a big raised deck. He said that he really thought we'd like it there. Well, Grandpa sure was right about that. About a week later, we finally got to see the cabin, and we loved it. There were some repairs that needed to be done, so we took care of those, and then we moved in about a month later. The property was peaceful and beautiful, but a lot more quiet than I was used to. And once my husband went back to work, it began to feel so lonely out there. He went on the road for at least a week at a time, and sometimes longer. So after we'd been living there a couple of months, I decided I was going to start taking walks. The cabin came with 68 acres of land, so why not enjoy it, I thought. I needed to do something to keep from going stir-crazy. So I started taking walks almost every day, and before long I knew that property like the back of my own hand. One day, on one of my walks, I heard an animal whining. I didn't have any pets at that time, but I really am an animal lover. I couldn't stand the thought of an injured animal possibly in need of help, so I followed the whining sounds. After a short walk, I came upon a horrible scene. I saw what appeared to be a mother dog that was dead, and there were 3 cute little puppies just sitting by their mother and whining. The puppies didn't appear to be more than 4 to 6 weeks old, so I decided to take all 3 of them home with me. There was no way I could just leave them out there. It was hard to get them back to the cabin. They were squirming all over the whole way back. And it took me about an hour, but I finally got them all home. I barricaded them in on the deck, and then I went out to get supplies and dog food. When I got back from the store that day, the 3 puppies were fast asleep, cuddled up together in a little black heap. That was our first day together. I was instantly smitten with the 3 puppies, and I couldn't wait for my husband to see them. He came home 2 weeks later, and he was shocked to see the puppies, but he too immediately fell in love with them. I told him the whole story about how I found them, and how I found their mother. Right away, my husband wanted to keep all 3 of them, and he asked me if any of them had names yet. I said, yep. All 3 were male dogs, and I named them Scooter, Smitty, and Smoke. My husband laughed and said that he liked the names. We kept them inside most of the time, and we were enjoying them so much, but we couldn't get over how fast they were growing, and we started to wonder just how big they were going to get. In just a few months, they were already bigger than most adult dogs, and their paws were huge. We would often joke that we were really raising horses and not dogs. My husband and I took all of them to the vet in the first month that we had them. We got them checked out, dewormed, and got all the shots they needed. The vet said they were in good condition, but he was stumped by the breed mix. He said that it can sometimes be difficult to tell when they're puppies, so we should just give it a few months. Then, after about 5 or 6 months, their behavior began to change. They started to run off into the woods. The 3 would always stay together, and they'd always come back a couple of hours later, so I tried not to let it bother me. At first, I did worry about them, but it quickly became their habit, and since they always came back, I stopped worrying about them. When our dogs hit the 1 year mark, they were huge. They were bigger than any dog either me or my husband had ever seen, and they were still growing. And when they ran off into the woods, we began to hear them howling. That was something new. The dogs also took walks with me on many days. They would run off in the woods, but they'd always come back to me within a few minutes. Then one day, when the dogs and I were out walking, I got the biggest shock when the 3 of them stood up on their hind legs and began howling. And when they stood up, it wasn't like they were standing up quickly to do a trick or beg for a treat. This was really different. Their legs made a popping or cracking sound, like their joints were cracking. The 3 of them were walking around and howling, acting like they did that all the time. I didn't know what to make of it. Then, 2 days after the first time that I saw them do that, there was this loud howling coming from somewhere out in the woods. I never heard howling quite like that before. I was sitting on the deck with the dogs when I heard the howling start up, and my 3 dogs started to howl back, and then I watched them stand up, again with their legs making that popping sound. This is when I thought I was losing my mind. I saw them walk down the steps of the deck, and they walked quickly from the deck into the woods. I think this is when I fainted, because I woke up, but I wasn't on the deck anymore. I was laying on the floor inside the cabin with the dogs laying beside me, but I don't know how I got in there. The last thing that I remembered was being on the deck. Fainting was the only explanation that made any sense, but I still didn't know how I got inside the cabin. I told myself that I must have dreamt the whole thing. My husband came home that day from a long trip, and we decided to do some grilling outside. It was a gorgeous day, and I was happy to have my husband back home. And sitting on the deck with the grill going, all felt so perfect. As my husband and I were enjoying that beautiful afternoon and chatting about different things, my husband commented that he couldn't get over how big the dogs looked to him after being on the road for almost 3 weeks. I remember asking him, "Do you really think they've grown that much?" My husband said, "Yes, definitely. There's a very noticeable difference." I guess because I saw them every day, I really didn't take much notice of it. All of a sudden, we heard howling coming from somewhere in the woods. It's always so quiet where our cabin is, so when the howling started, it got our attention. Our 3 dogs sat up and started howling back. Not a minute later, my husband finally got to witness the dogs standing up, their joints doing that popping thing. Then the 3 of them ran down the steps of the deck and into the woods, and they ran just like people would. There was nothing clumsy about how they walked or ran. It looked very natural for them. My husband started asking, "How the hell is that even possible?" And I told him about seeing this happen twice before, but that I excused it away, telling myself that I dreamt it or imagined it. Our dogs ran off, and they didn't come back the way they always had before. It was always so quiet there, but after that day, our quiet living wasn't so quiet anymore, and we started hearing gunshots and people screaming, and we worried that it was our dogs causing it. 2 days later, we were sitting outside having coffee, talking about the dogs, when all of a sudden 3 men came running out of the woods, screaming for us to help them. We saw that our dogs were coming out of the woods right behind them. The 3 men came up to our deck and stopped, then raised their guns and aimed it at our dogs. Well, my husband stood up and yelled for them to stop. He said, "Those are our dogs. Put your guns down now." But the men started shooting anyway. My husband was so angry. He told those men to get off of our land, and that includes the woods that they just came out of. And he told them that if he ever saw them on our property again, they'll be running from more than just the dogs. Just then, so much howling started, and then what came out of the woods were 4 more dogs, and these weren't ours. This is when we also noticed that our dogs were very different now. We don't understand how it happened, but they had gotten even bigger, and their bodies looked so muscular. They were already really big dogs to begin with, but now they were so unnaturally big. And our dogs moved to stand with the 4 other dogs that came out of the woods, The dogs all stood together like a pack. The three men hadn't gone anywhere yet, and one of them seemed to go weak and drop to the ground. The other two men were trying to get him to stand back up. All of the dogs started to howl again, and one of those men stood and took aim at the pack of dogs. I don't know if it was because he was shaking or if he was just a horrible shot, but he fired and missed, and fired and missed. One of the dogs that wasn't one of ours stepped forward, and in 3 seconds it cleared the field and was standing close now, baring its teeth and growling. Well, I was now terrified. I had no idea what this strange dog was going to do. I know that people always say that dogs don't actually smile, but honestly, it looked like that dog was smiling as it was growling. I was now really afraid that it was going to kill all of us. My husband whispered to me, "What the hell? These things have clawed fingers. Do you see that?" We were outnumbered by the dogs, and there wasn't anything we could do to help. The dog that was nearest to the cabin dragged away the man who was shooting at them just a few minutes earlier, and as the one man was getting dragged into the woods, leaving his weapon laying on the ground, the other two men ran off. My husband and I couldn't help but notice how the other 4 dogs looked exactly like our 3 dogs, and it made us wonder if one of those 4 dogs could be the father of our 3 and the others. I think we realized that we may not see our dogs again, and even if we did, things would never be the same. Our dogs were like those other dogs. We now knew that these were not regular dogs. Well, we didn't see them at all for a week, and when I finally saw them, they didn't run back home. They just passed through the yard and then ran back into the woods. We'd often hear the howling out in the woods, and we knew that some of that had to be coming from our dogs. My husband and I would even sometimes go out into the woods and call out their names, but they never came. Over the next year, we didn't see them at all, but we did continue to hear the howling. I felt so sad without them. I really missed them. My husband went out on the road through that year, so I think it was harder for me to be there and hear the howling, but no longer have them there with me. I tried to tell myself that the dogs were with their pack, and it's how it was supposed to be, but that really didn't make it any easier. Then one day, my husband brought home this adorable little black pitty mix puppy, a female. She was 11 weeks old, and her name was Scarlet. I was so happy to have a dog with me again, and I fell in love with her instantly. Over the next year, I nervously watched as Scarlet grew from puppy to adult. I guess I was half expecting to see Scarlet stand up one day and hear those joint-popping sounds and howling. But she didn't do anything unusual, and she barked like any normal dog. She was always firmly on 4 legs, except to briefly beg for a treat or jump on the couch. We still heard the howling in the woods, but I stopped taking long walks, and we never went too far in past the tree line. And Scarlet never ran into the woods or howled back. She would just look, so I knew she was hearing it. I got her spayed as soon as the vet said she was old enough. I didn't want her having litters of any kind. Scarlet lived for 15 years, and we loved her and spoiled her, and we took her passing very hard. We didn't get any more dogs until after my husband retired. That's when we got 2 black labs, a brother and sister, and they're just as spoiled as Scarlet was. We still live in the same cabin, but we don't know whatever became of our 3 big dogs. They never showed themselves again after that one time, and in time the howling became less, and then eventually it just stopped, and it was very quiet for a long time. We had a few people ask whatever happened to our 3 dogs, and we just made up a story about rehoming them. What made us decide to tell our story is that a few weeks ago, that howling started up again. Our labs are well trained and they don't run off, and we never leave them outside alone. But we are concerned about the howling because we've seen what they're capable of. By the way, we don't know whatever happened to the man that was dragged from our yard by one of those dogmen. Authorities never found anything on our land. No missing persons reports were made that we know of, And we didn't know who these men were. We didn't even know their names. So we just don't know. After all of this happened, my husband and I started doing a lot of research. We wanted to try to make sense of everything that we saw, and we believed that we raised 3 dogmen. As puppies, they didn't look or act like dogmen, not until they were fully grown, which apparently takes a lot longer than a regular dog. Our 3 dogs continued to grow after they hit that 1-year mark, when most dogs reach the adult stage and stop growing. There's still a lot that we don't know about, but we do know that these weren't normal dogs, and they changed into dogmen at about 16 months. As I said, we're concerned about the howling that we're hearing, and we hope that it stops. If anything happens, we'll let you know. Signed, Mr. and Mrs. T. Okay, guys, that's it for tonight, but I'll see you in a few days. Have a great night, everyone.